We're excited about our next guest. He will join us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We are the Out of Bounds Show, 1059 The Zone ESPN. We're driven by your next John Deere tractor at Ag Up Equipment. And there are over 20 locations in Mississippi, agup.com. John Deere, America's tractor. We are ESPN 1059 The Zone. And before I welcome in our next guest, Larry Bowa, longtime MLB player and MLB manager and coach. When I was a kid in the early to mid-'80s, I had every one of his baseball cards at the Phillies and Cubs. Larry Bowa, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Good, good. Hey, walk me through. I was reading up. I've known about you since I was a kid because we had WGN, and once you made it over to the Cubs, watched you all the time. But I knew all about the Phillies and Steve Carlton and you and Rose and so on. Now you weren't some kind of star baseball player growing up. I know your dad had a tie to baseball, but it didn't start like coming together for you until community college or JUCO. Is that right, Larry?
Yeah, I got cut from high school 3 years in a row, and the coach didn't say I wasn't good enough. He just said I was too small. And the fact that my dad played pro ball and got as high as AAA, he kept reinforcing that, hey, it doesn't matter how big you are. There's room on a baseball field for big guys, little guys. So to make a long story short, that summer after I got cut my third year in high school, they had a summer league. And I went and played on a summer league team. And this junior college coach, whose name was Del Bandy, came and watched the games. And he approached me after a couple of games and said, hey, I want you to come out for my team. And I sort of laughed at him. I said, I didn't even play high school, so I don't know how I'm going to make your team. He says, well, I'm going to give you every opportunity to make it. And I went there for 2 years. I made all conference. And basically Eddie Bachman, who was a scout for the Phillies, signed me. And then I signed with the Phillies and then played first year A, second year AA, third year AAA. Then I went to the big leagues my fourth year.
That's an incredible story. Larry Bowa on the Out of Bounds Show. When I'm a kid, I didn't obviously realize this. I didn't have Google and computers and so on. I'm just watching Larry Bowa play for the Phillies and the Cubs and thinking, hey, this is awesome. And now that I'm older, I'm sitting here thinking with all this travel ball and everything else, and people think they're stars at 7, 8, 9 years old. Larry Bowa doesn't make his cut 3 years in a row. So your dad's connected to the game, as you just said, and I read yesterday. As you're getting cut year after year, do you ever go to your dad or just think, you know what, the hell with this? I don't want to play baseball anymore. I want to do something else.
You know why I never did that? Because my dad always said that I have a lot to offer. Obviously, when I first came up, I wasn't a very good hitter, but back when we played, if you caught the ball, played short, second, center field, and catcher, that old adage, strength up the middle, and then let the corner people in the infield and outfield do all the hitting, that was basically the mindset of me. But through hard work and a great hitting instructor, I ended up getting over 2,000 hits in the big leagues. But I'm not going to tell you it was easy. It took a lot of hard work. It had a lot to do with the manager that was managing me, the hitting coach that was spending hours at a time during the winter with me. The other thing that bothered me a little bit after I made the all conference in junior college, I never got drafted either. I mean, that was the first year of the draft. And so I went through the draft and everything. Obviously the odds were stacked against me. My dad always told me, you don't want to be a minor league baseball rat because you can ride buses your whole life. He says, but if you think you can do this, you got to go after your dream. And he taught me how to play the game fundamentally. I was able to move runners. I was able to steal a base. I was a real good fielder, had a good arm. I was fast. And then, after my second year, played A and AA and triple, then I went to AAA and they told me that, hey, we want you to learn how to switch hit. So I didn't really start switch hitting till I was in AAA. And you talk about an experiment, man, that was tough. I mean, I did everything right-handed my whole life, and all of a sudden they say, okay, now you got to hit left-handed. And to learn at the AAA level was it was really tough, but whether it was me being stubborn or me knowing that I know I can do this, things worked out for me. And I think another thing that happens when you have to be a little bit, obviously you got to be good to play in the big leagues, but you also have to be lucky. You have to be in the right place at the right time. And when I went to the Phillies in 1970, they were rebuilding. It wasn't a real good team. So obviously the manager had more patience with me. I wasn't doing anything the first 2 or 3 months. And eventually everything clicked in for me, and ended up winning the World Series and playing in 5 All-Star games and 1 Gold Gloves. I look back on my career, and I sort of think it was a blessing in disguise to have to go through all the obstacles that I went through to get to the big leagues.
Wow. That's a remarkable story. Larry Bowa, Phillies, Cubs, Mets, longtime manager and coaching career in MLB. And he joins us on the Out of Bounds show and the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Still, cut all 3 years in high school, and yet makes it. When did you realize? Obviously, your dad. What a powerful and supportive person for you. When did you realize, hey, this thing's going somewhere, and my career may have some legs, Larry?
I think the biggest thing, when I signed, Eddie Bachman, who was a scout, told the Phillies, hey, the worst scenario here is he's going to be an organization player. Excuse me. I think he can help you when he's done playing, being a coach or manager in the minor leagues. And so when I signed, I was under the assumption that, hey, they're going to give me an opportunity. And to be honest with you, I didn't really know I was going to be in the big leagues until the 3rd year when I went to Eugene, Oregon, which was our AAA team. Bob Skinner was our manager, and he called me in and he said, hey, you made the team as a utility player, but I'm going to give you an option here. You can go down and learn how to switch hit and become an everyday player if you're successful switch hitting, or you can make this team as a utility player. And I didn't want to play utility. I think utility player, I think that's one of the hardest jobs in baseball. You're sitting on the bench, you sit for 4 or 5 days, you got to go in, and there's always pressure on you. You got to do this, you got to do that. Whereas when you're an everyday player and the manager believes in you, you go 0 for 4, 0 for 8, you're still going to be in there. But when he told me that I could be an everyday player if I learned how to switch hit, then a light went off and said, hey, maybe I can do this. And then I went to AAA, and I think I ended up hitting around 270 or 280, which was really good for learning how to switch hit. So I would say after that spring training, when I said I would rather go to AAA and play every day as opposed to being utility player, I felt that maybe I had a chance.
Wow. Most people, if they're going to be a switch hitter, they do it as a kid, maybe a teenager. To do it at over 20 years old. I mean, that's
it was hard.
Yeah, I bet it was. Okay. So when you're with the Phillies, and you talked about the rebuild, Larry, and then things start to happen there, and y'all eventually win the World Series. You had a hell of a postseason. What was that like as that team started, as y'all started to add more talent? When did y'all realize, hey, we may have a shot at this, and we may not just be average. We may be really good at some point for Philadelphia.
Well, I think in the mid-'70s, everyone back when we played, everybody knew the guys in the minor leagues, the guys that were coming up. In fact, playing in Reading, which is real close to Philly, a lot of fans, when the Phillies would go on the road trips, they would come and watch the Reading Phillies play, and they'd see all the prospects. And so in the mid-'70s, we started playing really good. I mean, we had the core group of guys was Bob Boone, Mike Schmidt, myself, Greg Lazinski. Obviously we got Steve Carlton in a trade with the Cardinals. So we saw things starting to come together, but we kept coming up short. We kept playing the Big Red Machine at that time, who was unbelievably talented. And then we had a couple series with the Dodgers, who had a great team. And we kept getting edged out, whether it was an umpire's call, whether it was a bad play, whether it lack of hitting, whatever it was, we were just coming up short. And then they decided, hey, you know what? We might need a missing piece here. and that's when we went out and got Pete Rose, and of course Dallas Green took over, who I thought was very instrumental in us progressing to where we were in 1980. But once we had those down times against the Reds and the Dodgers, it got to the point where we knew we were good, but we were lacking something. And I think Pete gave us that little push at the end. And of course, Dallas Green being a no-nonsense type manager, I think that helped out a lot. And then once we got through Houston in that 80 series where every game was extra innings except the first one, I really felt going in the World Series there was no pressure on us at all. We had finally got to where we wanted to go. We had a tough series with Houston, and we ended up beating Kansas City 4-2, and that's how that thing sort of unraveled for us.
Larry Bowa, World Series champion, player and coach. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, sharing stories of Phillies, and hopefully we'll have some time to get into some other things, but this is great, and how they became World Series champs. You mentioned Pete Rose had been with the Reds, and
right.
and they had won. Did you feel it right away when he joined y'all that this guy was a winner and he brought something different to the locker room and the approach of the team, Larry?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, you talk about somebody that's a positive individual. And he, when he first came over, he says, you guys, every time we played you, and he might have been just trying to build our confidence up, but he says, we didn't like playing you guys because you guys were very talented. And, when you come up with a core group of guys that learned how to win together and learned how to lose together, that was a very tight-knit group that we had come up through our minor league system. But we were also cognizant of we're missing something. And I think Pete was the guy that, whether it was him telling everybody how good we were when he watched from the other dugout, or whether constantly saying, hey, we can do this, we can do this. It was a combination of things, but Pete definitely was one of the factors that, whether it was his attitude, his work ethic off the charts. I never seen anybody as competitive as he was. But whatever it was, that was the push that we needed, and it did pay off.
So he was always driven, Larry. Just whatever whether it was practice or in the cage, obviously in the games, in the locker room talking to people. I mean, he was always on edge, competitive, and a driving force.
Always. I mean, if you had 2 hits, he'd sit down. He says, you got to get 3. You got to get 3. If you had 3, you got to get 4. And, his philosophy all the time was, he talked baseball with all of us. He says, hey, when you're facing the number 3 and 4 starters in a rotation, you got to do damage on them because you're going to be facing Gibson and Seaver, and those guys are tough. You might go 0 for 2 with a walk, but you wear out these guys that pitch in a 3 or 4 man rotation. I mean, he would break it down into. It would seem so easy, but he had so much talent. I mean, you talk about a switch hitter, and if you take a look at over 4,000 hits, that's playing 20 years, getting over 200 hits a year. I mean, what he did, obviously, the gambling part of it was terribly wrong. But if the way that people advocate gambling now in all sports on TV and everything, I think he's paid his dues. And I just wish if we could turn back the clock, that once they brought it to his attention that he got caught doing something that he wasn't supposed to, if he would have admitted it right away, he'd probably be in the Hall of Fame right now. But the fact that he didn't do it right away, and eventually he did say, hey, okay, that's what I did. I guarantee one thing, knowing him, he didn't ever bet against his team to lose. But that's not the really reason for this. He got punished, and he shouldn't have done what he did. But the bottom line is, I don't think anybody's ever going to break that 4,000 hit record. First of all, owners aren't going to have enough money to pay these guys.
No.
You get over 200 hits a year for 20 years. So,
no.
But that's a record I think is going to stand forever.
5-time All-Star, Larry Bowa, World Series champ as a player and a coach. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. I had all his baseball cards, watched many games that he played in. Do you ever talk to Pete Rose, Larry?
Oh yeah. In fact, we just had a big. We celebrated the 1980 2 years ago when we saw him. And I see him occasionally. He'll come, whether it be a memorabilia show where you're signing autographs, and he's doing good. Pete's doing good. I mean, I think he's already come to the conclusion that he's probably not going to get into the Hall of Fame, but he's handling it the best he can, and he knows he made mistakes. He'll be the first to tell you he made some mistakes. But he's the kind of guy that when you played against him, you hated him.
Yeah.
And when he got on your team, you loved him. I mean, he's one of those guys, man, that you talk about never giving away at bats, concentration level at a high level every at bat. It doesn't matter if you're winning 10-0 or losing 10-0. This guy was locked in as soon as he put that uniform on.
Wow. Charlie Hustle. Remember watching him as a kid too. Incredible. Larry Bowa joining us on the Out of Bounds show, sharing some great stories. Was cut all 3 years from his high school team. So parents and kids out there, remember that. Didn't give up. Dad continued to support him, found a way. Even if it's just to play in college. Obviously, it ended up with MLB with Larry Bowa. Mike Schmidt, I just loved him as a kid. Yep. Again, I ended up with like 20,000 baseball cards. So I was 7, 8, 9 years old. 1983. I'm 10 years old. I couldn't get enough of that era in which you played, Larry. What was Mike Schmidt like as a personality and a teammate, Larry?
Mike was pretty. His demeanor, I think the reason he didn't hit it off in Philly early in his career, let me state that. I mean, at the end of his career, they loved this guy and they appreciated what he did. But he always made things look so easy. You could put any kind of ball in his hands, bowling ball, golf ball, football, basketball. He was just a natural athlete, had tremendous skills. I'll give you a real quick story. In I think it was 72 or 3. I don't know. Well, he was a high pick for the Phillies, and usually when you have a high pick, they fly you into Philadelphia, have the big press conference. They let you go down on the field and work out, and then they'll send you to the affiliate that they want to send you to. In this particular instance, he was going to work out in Philly, then go to Reading, Pennsylvania, which is real close. So I'm taking pregame and I can, when you feel somebody standing behind you, I felt somebody stand behind me, and he signed as a shortstop. And so I turned around and I said, "Hey, what's up?" And I introduced myself, and I said, "Congratulations." And he says, "Do you mind if I take some grounders?" I said, "No." So we started taking grounders, and I could see this guy's going to be something special just by watching him. And so, me being my personality, after a while we start talking. I said, "Oh, by the way," I said, "you might want to pick another position because I plan on being here for a while." He tells that story all the time. And eventually they did move him to third base. And I told him, I said, "You're lucky I played, because if you played short, you might have blown out your knees or whatever." I said, "You went over there and played third and became a Hall of Famer." But he would have been a Hall of Famer no matter what position he played. But people had the wrong – he didn't come across as a true Philadelphia player, guys that got dirty. And he didn't have to do that. He was such a great athlete. And so he wanted to win as bad as I wanted to win. But people – because of his personality, and he's sort of aloof when he did his pregame stuff, a lot of times people thought he didn't care. But trust me, he cared more than anybody. And you could tell his very first year, he hit under 200, but I think he had close to 20 home runs. You could see this guy's going to be something special. And on defense, he was unbelievable. He could go right, he could go left, he could come in, he could go back. He's the greatest. I never got to play in the American League, so I know Brooks Robinson, watching him on video, was a great third baseman. But as far as in the National League, I'd never seen a third baseman like this guy.
Schmidt was so good. God, and you're right.
Yes, he was.
He made it look easy, so I don't think everybody appreciated what he was doing. And yet,
right,
playing so long, it's damn hard to make all those plays. Larry Bowa on the Out of Bounds show, longtime player and manager, coach, Major League Baseball, 2-time World Series champion, 5-time All-Star, and he joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. I've only got a couple of minutes, but I got to talk a little bit about Chicago. So you go to Chicago. I'm a kid. I have WGN. That was back when we didn't get a bunch of games on Saturday. You got the game of the week, but you got all the Cubs games. Okay. So it was you and that whole crew. like Lee Smith was one of my favorite players ever. I always say this, Larry.
Yep.
It took Lee Smith an hour and a half to walk from the bullpen to the mound when y'all called him in. I just loved it.
It took about 30 seconds, though, to get it 3 up and 3 down, though.
Wasn't he so good? Golly.
Yeah, he was. He was great.
What was it like to I think it was the 84 series that broke my heart with the Padres Cubs and Tony Gwynn, and I love Tony, but I had to be a Cub. What was it like to play for Chicago and Wrigley and have Harry Carey there and all those day games, Larry?
Next to playing in Philly, it was the greatest place I ever played. The city was great. At that time, we didn't have lights. I think that was the biggest concern, because when we went on road trips to the West Coast or East Coast, we'd play night games, and we'd come back and we without a day off and play a day game. That was the biggest difference. Eventually, Dallas Green got lights there, but because that team was not a real good team, and then when all of us went over there, they used to call it the Chicago Phillies, because a lot of those players, Bob Dernier, Ryan Sandberg, myself, Gary Matthews, all these guys played with the Phillies, went over with Chicago, with Dallas. But that city was electric that entire 84. And like you said, we win the first 2 games against San Diego. That's probably the most disappointed I've ever been. Not knowing, when you go up 2-0, the best out of 5, I'm not saying you think you got it made, but you got the hammer in your hand. And we went out there and they swept us. I got to give them credit. They swept us. And, looking back on that would have been a great series, us playing Detroit, but it didn't happen. But I loved playing in Chicago. It was almost like you had a regular job, especially when you were at home. You get up 8 o'clock, you go to the ballpark. By 4:30, 5 o'clock, you're done. You go home, you have dinner like a normal human being.
Yeah.
It was a nice routine to get into. Then you'd have to go on the road and obviously make adjustments on the road. But it was a great year in 84. I just wish we'd have won another game there and got to a World Series.
This is great. Larry Bowa on the Out of Bounds Show. Larry, thank you so much for your time today. Cool for me to interview someone who I watched play so much over on the NL side with the Phillies and the Cubs as a kid. And your stories on Pete Rose and Mike Schmidt and yourself. It's incredible.
I got one real quick story I'm going to tell you. My very first game, I played for Spartanburg, South Carolina. I was a starting shortstop. I'd never been out of California, so obviously I went to spring training in Florida. Then I broke camp. And my very first game, the one thing I did as a player, I put the ball in play all the time. I struck out 4 straight times, and I was sitting in my chair, and the manager, Bob Wellman, came over. He says, "You all right?" And I said, "Hey, if this is what professional baseball is all about," I said, "you might as well send me back to Sacramento." And he said, "This guy's going to be something special." And I'm thinking he's just trying to, keep me going in a positive direction. Well, anyway, the pitcher turned out to be Nolan Ryan. So
wow.
I look back at that.
Larry Bowa on the Out of Bounds Show. Larry, thank you so much. Take care, my friend.
Oh, all right, you take care. Thank you.
That was great. That made my week. Larry Bowa on the Out of Bounds Show and the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. If you missed any of it, go to Apple Podcast or Spotify. Search Out of Bounds with Bo Bounds. We'll see you tomorrow.